بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ثم أما بعد. Inshallah, today we'll go over Bab al-Huzn, the chapter on grief, and Tayammum in the fiqh session. The first, Sheikh al-Harawi rahimahullah said Qism al-Abwab. You know how he divided the book? You know how in every chapter he divides this, basically every chapter into three categories. So whenever he talks about muhasaba, for instance, or self-reckoning, he talks to you about muhasaba for the public, muhasaba for the elites, you know, the select few, and muhasaba for the topmost or the most special servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And how he divides everything into three parts. Every one of those categories is divided into three parts. Certainly, things don't happen like this in reality, but he tries to do this. Like not everything is divided into three, parts in reality, and not every one of those concepts can be divided into three parts. But what he tries to do basically is to facilitate learning. He's trying to effectively teach us. So that's why he divides things in this way. And then he divided the entire book into 10 divisions. And every division is divided into 10 stations. And that is also to facilitate our learning. So what we started with is Qism al-Bidayat, or the division of the beginnings. And now we will be starting with Qism al-Abwab, which is the division of the gates. So the 10 divisions that he has in the book, Manazil As-Saa'ireen, or the stations of the seekers, or the wayfarers, the 10 stations that he has are the first one. We're done with the first one, by the way. We're done with 10 stations. And the 10 stations that we just finished last time with Babu Sama, or audition or hearing, is Qism al-Bidayat, the division of al-Bidayat, or the beginnings. And then we will go over Qism al-Abwab, the division of gates. And after Qism al-Abwab, Qism al-Mu'amalat, dealings, transactions, dealings. And after Qism al-Mu'amalat, we'll have Qism al-Akhlaq, morals. After Qism al-Akhlaq, Qism al-Usul, foundations. After Qism al-Usul, Qism al-Awdiyah, valleys. And after Qism al-Awdiyah, the division of valleys, then we will go over the division of Ahwal, inner states. And after that, we will go over the division of al-Walayat. Walayat is plural of walaya, different from wilaya, So al-Walayat, or the plural of walaya, walaya comes from, it's the state of being a wali, translated by some people as sainthood, or wali is translated as saint. But it is a loaded term. It comes from a different religious background, therefore it is loaded with connotations that may or may not agree, or may not be in harmony with our own definition and concept of walaya. Therefore, we try to avoid those loaded terms, and we use, sometimes it's translated as friendship. It's being like an intimate friend of God, wali, an intimate friend of God. And then after Qism al-Walayat, we will go over the division of al-Haqa'iq, realities. And after Qism al-Haqa'iq, we will go over the division of al-Nihayat, the endings. So he started by Qism al-Bidayat, the beginnings. He ended by Qism al-Nihayat, the endings. And it is it's an ascending order, inshallah, today we'll start Qism al-Abwab, or the division of gates, we will go over, without the microphone, it takes a lot of effort, by the way, to shout. We'll go over the first chapter in this division, the division of al-Abwab, or the gates, which is Bab al-Huzn, the chapter on grief or Huzn. And when we come back from our Ramadan break, we will carry on with the division of gates. Why is that? Why are we not doing any more tazkiyah before the Ramadan break? Because we still have one, halaqah next week, inshallah. Because next weekend on Saturday we will have Hayd al-Nifas. In fiqh we will have menstrual and postpartum bleeding and the rulings that pertain to menstrual and postpartum bleeding, and that will take the 2 sessions. And keep in mind, we have been behind on fiqh by 1 session. So we have been ahead on tazkiyah and behind on fiqh by 1 session. So next time we will give the 2 sessions to fiqh, and then both tazkiyah and fiqh will be parallel to each other in terms of the number of sessions that we had. So Imam al-Harawi rahimahullah ta'ala, Shaykh al-Islam al-Harawi rahimahullah ta'ala, said here the division of gates. وأما قسم الأبواب فهو 10 أبواب وهي الحزن والخوف والإشفاق والخشوع والإخبات والزهد والورع والتبتل والرجاء والرغبة. Al-Huzn, these are the 10 divisions. Al-Huzn is grief. Al-Khawf is fear. Al-Ishfaq is concern, to be mushfiq, to be concerned. Al-Khushu' is humility. And these are basically very crude, rough translations because they're, each one of those concepts needs to be explained, not just translated, one-word translation. Al-Khushu' is humility. Al-Ikhbat is capitulation or surrender. Declaration of defeat and surrender and capitulation. Az-Zuhd is asceticism, renunciation of the dunya or asceticism. Al-Wara' is pious caution. Al-Tabattul is dedication. Al-Raja' is hope. Al-Raghba is aspiration. So these are the 10 abwab, or the 10 chapters, the 10 stations that we will be going over, inshallah. And then he starts by Babul Huzn, or the chapter on grief. And he says, قال الله عز وجل تولوا أعينهم تفيض من الدمع حزنا. Allah Almighty said, they turned back while their eyes overflowed with tears out of fear. While their eyes overflowed with tears out of fear. Out of grief, I'm sorry. While their eyes overflowed with tears out of grief. Where did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say this in Surah At-Tawbah? وَلَا عَلَى الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَتَوْكَ لِتَحْمِلَهُمْ قُلْتَ لَا أَجِدُ مَا أَحْمِلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ تَوَلَّوْا وَلَا عَلَى الَّذِينَ إِذَا مَا أَتَوْكَ لِتَحْمِلَهُمْ قُلْتَ لَا أَجِدُ مَا أَحْمِلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ تَوَلَّوْا وَأَعْيُنُهُمْ تَفِيضُ مِنَ الدَّمْعِ حَزَنًا أَلَّا يَجِدُوا مَا يُنْفِقُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was speaking about the people who are exempt, that we will not be responsible for not joining the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the battle. And he said, of those who will not be responsible, who will be exempt, who will be pardoned and forgiven, those who came to you and asked you to basically provide them with means of transportation, to provide them with a beast of burden to basically join you in the battle. And you said, I don't find anything, I can't afford you any means of transportation. Then they turned back, walked away, and their eyes were overflowing with tears because they could not find what they could spend in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They couldn't afford to spend anything in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So those are people that basically came to the Prophet ﷺ hoping that they will join him in the battle. And it was a perilous campaign, dangerous one. So they wanted to sacrifice themselves. And when they were told that, no, you cannot come with us, they did not walk away rejoicing in the opportunity. You know, this is basically, they will not be subject to harm. This is a perilous campaign or expedition. They will not be subject to harm, and they are forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet told them, you're pardoned. I can't take you with me. So anyone with any weakness of faith would be rejoicing in this opportunity, you know, that I lucked out. You know, I did not have to do this, and I was forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I was forgiven by God. But those are people of faith. And then they walked away with their eyes overflowing with tears that they cannot join the Prophet ﷺ in this perilous and dangerous and risky campaign. So they were grieving over the fact that they were unable to spend in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why the Shaykh here used this verse to tell us that grief is a station that the believers will go through. And then he defined this station, and we will talk about, you know, whether this is a station that the believers need to go through, must go through, or are just destined to go through, even though it is not necessarily prescribed for them. It is not basically demanded of them. They are not encouraged to go through it. And the perpetuity of this station is certainly harmful and not has never been praised by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and has never been asked of us. So he says that al-huzn or al-hazan توجع لفائت أو تأسف على ممتنع وله ثلاث درجات. Huzn, توجع لفائت, grief is the feeling of agony over something that was missed. أو تأسف على ممتنع, or frustration over something that's unattainable. وله ثلاث درجات, and it is 3 levels. So feeling of agony over something that was missed, an opportunity that was missed, an opportunity to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that was missed. Certainly we're not talking about frivolous grief. We're not talking about grief over the dunya. Where this station, although grief over the dunya is something that we are destined to also as human beings because of our weakness and our nature and because of the nature of this dunya and the unpredictability of this dunya. But the grief that we are mainly talking about here is grief over missing an opportunity to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or grief over this opportunity being unattainable to you. So if you missed it, you're mutawajja, you have pain, agony, you have anguish over the fact that you missed that opportunity to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the past. And if it is unattainable, like those Sahaba that came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam asking him to take them with him to the battle, and they were told that they cannot come, they cannot join. And this is ta'assuf ala mumtana. This is basically anguishing also. It means frustration here over something that's unattainable. They were frustrated because they can't go out with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that is al-huzn that we are talking about here. Keep in mind, like Ibn al-Qayyim talks about this in detail in Madaarij As-Saalikeen. He talks about the fact that we have never been asked to basically visit that station, let alone stay in it. We've never been asked even to visit the station, let alone stay in it. But it is, every believer is bound to go through that station. Periodically, sometimes you will go through that station. And you're bound to have a taste of it almost all the time. because a believer is someone who has concern not only for himself but for humanity. Didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ أَلَّا يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ in Surah Al-Shu'ara, لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ أَلَّا يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. Perhaps you will kill yourself out of grief that they have no faith, or they did not accept faith, that they are not believers. You're about to destroy yourself out of grief. And in Surah Al-Kahf, لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ. So, إِن لَمْ يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَذَا الْحَدِيثِ أَسَفًا. So this was repeated, and the Prophet ﷺ was told several times, you are about to destroy yourself out of grief over them. You are about to destroy yourself out of grief over them. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ was a human being. The Prophet recognized that, although this hadith may not be authentically traceable, but the meaning is appropriate, that the Prophet ﷺ used to say, وَأَشْهَدُكَ أَنَّ الْعِبَادَ إِخْوَةٌ, and I, testify before you that all of the ibad, all of these slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are brothers. And certainly the concept is a valid concept. We all came out from the womb of Hawa radiallahu anha. So grieving over the condition of humanity is something that every believer should go through. And the condition of humanity is never that great so that you could escape from that grief, that type of grief. You will always have a taste of that type of grief because of the conditions of humanity. You're grieving over, the calamities that befall human beings, and certainly, like someone with a heart that's tender, with a heart that is sensitive, he will always have some or another cause of grief. The child of their neighbors, and this is whether they're Muslim, not Muslim. The child of my neighbors was diagnosed with cancer. Wouldn't that cause you grief for some considerable time? And as long as you encounter things of that nature, then you are bound, you are destined to that station, to visit it, and to have a taste of it, station of grief. But it is not, the grief that we were forbidden from, although we will have a taste of this grief all the time, and although we are bound to the station of grief, we were forbidden from grief. In Surah Al-Imran, Allah says, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنْتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. And do not weaken and do not grieve when you are superior, while you are superior, if you are true believers. If you are true believers. So we were forbidden from grief. It's not something desirable. We were forbidden from grief. The Prophet ﷺ used to seek refuge in Allah from grief. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi wal-hazan. Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from an anxiety and grief. An anxiety and distress, al-ham, and grief. So could it be something desirable, and the Prophet ﷺ is seeking refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from something that is desirable? No. Will any believer escape from the station of grief? No. How could it be undesirable and a believer will never escape from it? It's undesirable. It is forbidden. So we're talking about natural grief. Natural grief is where you're bound to this station because of your nature, because of the nature of the dunya, and because of your weaknesses, and sometimes because of your strengths, because you're tender-hearted, you're kind-hearted, and the calamities that befall the people around you, all the people around you, the calamities that befall humanity, impact you in this way, cause you grief, like they used to cause the Prophet ﷺ grief. So that is the difference. Grief then is desirable in the sense of being a manifestation of something else, not desirable in and of itself, because Allah does not want to grieve for us. Not desirable in and of itself, but it is desirable as a manifestation of something else. What was grief a manifestation of in the case of those companions who wanted to go out with the Prophet ﷺ? It's a manifestation of their faith. It is a manifestation of their sacrifice. It's a manifestation of their love of the Prophet ﷺ. They did not want to stay behind and let the Prophet ﷺ go out to that dangerous, risky expedition without them, accompanying the Prophet ﷺ. Perhaps they can defend him, perhaps they can protect him. So this is desirable as a manifestation, not desirable in itself. But then it becomes completely forbidden when it overtakes you. And that is why Allah said, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا. Do not weaken and do not grieve. The grief that overtakes you, that grief that causes you despair, is forbidden, and it is unbefitting of believers. Believers will not be subject to this grief. That is why when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used to say this to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَلَا تَحْزَنْ عَلَيْهِمْ وَاخْفِضْ جَنَاحَكَ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَلَا تَكُ فِي ضَيْقٍ مِّمَّا يَمْكُرُونَ وَلَا تَحْزَنْ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا تَكُ فِي ضَيْقٍ مِّمَّا يَمْكُرُونَ قد نعلم إنه لا يحزنك الذي يقولون سورة الأنعام ولا تحزن عليهم واخفض جناحك للمؤمنين سورة الحج. He used to say to him, do not grieve over them. واخفض جناحك للمؤمنين, and lower your wing of humility to the believers, and so on. All of these prohibitions, they are against this type of grief that causes despair. لعلك باخع نفسك, you're about to destroy yourself. Don't destroy yourself out of grief. You're bound to grieve. You're bound to have concern for them. You're bound to be sad about their conditions because you are their brother. واذكر أخا عاد. Remember the brother of Ad. How could the brother of Ad not grieve over the condition of Ad? How could the brother of Thamud not grieve over the condition of Thamud? You know, remember in Surah Yasin, يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين. This righteous man said when he was in, between life and death, he was saying, يا ليت قومي يعلمون. I hope that my people had known بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين. How my Lord had forgiven me and honored me. I wish they had known. Now he's seeing his place in paradise, and then he is wishing that his people who rejected faith would get a chance to see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored him, so that they may accept faith and so that they may join him in paradise. That should be the feeling of every believing man or woman. You want all of humanity, you want all of your brothers and sisters in humanity to be in paradise. Not necessarily to join us in paradise, because we don't know. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it our abode. He had seen his seat in paradise, and he was wishing that they would join him in paradise. So then that's the difference between the grief that Allah wants for us and the grief that Allah does not want for us. Allah wants the grief that's a manifestation of something else, some other strength. Your kind-heartedness, your faith, your sacrifice, your aspiration, your raghba in pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you're kept back from pleasing Allah, then you have this frustration and grief. And then we'll talk about, this in some more detail. But farah is what Allah wants for us. Joy, happiness is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants for us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Yasin, قُلْ بِفَضْلِ اللَّهِ وَبِرَحْمَتِهِ فَبِذَلِكَ فَلْيَفْرَحُوا هُوَ خَيْرٌ مِّمَّا يَجْمَعُونَ. قُلْ بِفَضْلِ اللَّهِ وَبِرَحْمَتِهِ. Say, in the bounty of Allah and in His mercy, فَبِذَلِكَ فَلْيَفْرَحُوا هُوَ خَيْرٌ مِّمَّا يَجْمَعُونَ. In that let them rejoice. It is better than everything they accumulate. It's better than the money, the wealth, the status, everything they accumulate. قل بفضل الله وبرحمته فبذلك فليفرحوا هو خير مما يجمعون. The farah was mentioned in the Quran several times in a negative context, right? ولا تفرح إن الله لا يحب الفرحين تولوا وهم فرحون فرحوا بما عندهم من العلم كل حزب بما لديهم فرحون. Many times, but if you really examine every time farah was, this is Allah is telling us, فليفرحوا, let them rejoice, let them be happy. Allah wants that for us. Allah does not want grief for us, except when it is a manifestation of something that is desirable, not for itself, but as a manifestation. But Allah wants farah for us. Whenever a farah was condemned, it was not a farah in the sense of happiness, benign happiness. It is farah in the sense of malignant exaltation, malignant, boasting, arrogance, pride. You're also farah. You're also exulting over your knowledge. You're exulting over your wealth. You're exulting over your power. Every time in the Quran, farah was condemned. It was condemned because of this. So like in Surah Al-Qasas, in the story of Qarun, for instance, when they said to him, إِذْ قَالَ لَهُ قَوْمُهُ لَا تَفْرَحْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْفَرِحِينَ. Behold, when his people said to him, لَا تَفْرَحْ, don't exult, for Allah does not like the exultants. They were talking to Qarun, the one who said, إِنَّمَا أُوتِيتُهُ عَلَىٰ عِلْمٍ عِنْدِي, the one who said, I was given this, I was given all of this because of my knowledge, because of my skills, because of my, indisposition, and did not recognize the favor, the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on him. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, for instance, about the munafiqeen, it's the opposite picture from the mu'mineen that came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from the companions that came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and asked him to go out with him, and turned away with their eyes overflowing with tears when they knew that they cannot risk their lives for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But on the the opposite picture of this is the munafiqeen. When in Surah At-Tawbah also Allah says, إن تصبك حسنة تسؤهم وإن تصبك مصيبة وإن تصبك مصيبة يفرحوا بها ويقولوا قد إن تصبك حسنة تسؤهم وإن تصبك مصيبة يقولوا قد أخذنا أمرنا من قبل ويتولوا وهم فرحون. إن تصبك حسنة تسؤهم. إن تصبك حسنة تسؤهم. If a hasana befalls you, if a good thing befalls you, تسؤهم, it will distress them, it will grieve them. وإن تصبك مصيبة يقولوا قد أخذنا أمرنا من قبل. They will say, and if a musiba or a calamity befalls you, they will say, we have taken our matter into our own hands. We've taken our precautions before. يقولوا قد أخذنا أمرنا من قبل ويتولوا وهم فرحون, and they turn away rejoicing, or they turn back rejoicing. So those are people who watch from a distance, and then if the believers are victorious, they are saddened by the victory because they were not part of it. And if a calamity befalls the believers, وإن تصبك مصيبة يقولوا قد أخذنا أمرنا من قبل, they will say, we have taken precautions, we have not joined them. It's good that we've taken our matter into our own hands and we did not listen to them and we did not go out with them. We've taken our precautions. ويتولوا وهم فرحون, and they turn away rejoicing. Rejoicing that they lucked out, rejoicing that they were not part of it. And sometimes, although we may not be just as bad, but sometimes we have, some of that as well. I remember Abu Bakr al-Harbi said that Sari al-Saqati rahimahullah. Sari al-Saqati rahimahullah. He was a student of Ma'ruf al-Karkhi, and Ma'ruf was one of the greatest ascetics. One time Imam Ahmad was asked about Ma'ruf, how much Ma'ruf knows, how much Ma'ruf, about the knowledge of Ma'ruf al-Karkhi. And he said, وهل يطلب العلم إلا لما وصل إليه معروف؟ Would ilm be sought except for that which Ma'ruf had already attained? So why are you asking me about Ma'ruf's knowledge? All this knowledge that we seek is to attain the status of Ma'ruf, or to reach the station that Ma'ruf had already reached. So Ma'ruf was the teacher of Saray al-Saqati. It was actually reported that Saray al-Saqati one day, there was like a little girl who had a pot in her hand, and it fell from her hand and broke. So she was distressed. Ma'ruf al-Karkhi went and bought her another one and gave it to her. At Saray al-Saqati. So Ma'ruf said to him, he was impressed. Ma'ruf was impressed by his kind-heartedness, and he said to him, بَغَضَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْكَ الدُّنْيَا. May Allah make the dunya hated to you, or may Allah make you hate the dunya. And Saray used to say afterwards, كُلُّ مَا أَنَا فِيهِ الْيَوْمِ مِنْ بَرَكَاتِ دَعْوَةِ مَعْرُوفٍ. Everything that I have today is because of the blessings of the supplication of Ma'ruf. But at any rate, going back to Saray al-Saqati, Saray al-Saqati said, قلت الحمد لله مرة فأنا أستغفر الله منها منذ 30 سنة. I said Alhamdulillah one time, and ever since I have been asking Allah to forgive me for saying Alhamdulillah for 30 years, for saying Alhamdulillah that time for the last 30 years. I've been asking Allah to forgive me. How could you ask Allah to forgive you for saying Alhamdulillah? So the story is, there was a fire in the market, and Saray al-Saqati had a store in the market. And when the fire erupted in the market, someone came to Saray al-Saqati and he said to him, the whole market was ablaze, and destroyed by the fire, except your store. And then he said, Alhamdulillah, that his store was not burned. And then he felt so guilty that he did not actually care for all of the other merchants in the market, or all of his neighbors who lost their stores. And he said, Alhamdulillah, where the appropriate response would have been, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, not Alhamdulillah. Although Alhamdulillah, we say Alhamdulillah, but in every condition. But the appropriate response at that time is to say, Inna lillahi wa ilayhi raji'un, to feel the pain of your fellow Muslims, to feel the pain of your neighbors, and before you say Alhamdulillah for the survival of your property. Anyway, so in this case, exulting is condemnable in the Quran, and we probably should proceed now. But anyway, go over the rest of the ayat that talk about farah. You will always find, فَلَمَّا جَاءَتْهُمْ رُسُلُنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ فَرِحُوا بِمَا عِنْدَهُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ. They rejoiced in the knowledge they had. You'll always find فتحنا عليهم أبواب كل شيء حتى إذا فرحوا بما أوتوا, until they are in Surah Al-An'am, حتى إذا فرحوا بما أوتوا, until they rejoiced in that which they possess, or that which they were given. It's talking about knowledge here, exulting over your knowledge, exulting over wealth, and so on. But farah, rejoicing in the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what Allah wants from us and for us to show Him. وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. Speak of the favors and bounties of your Lord, and that's speaking بِلِسَانِ الْحَالِ قَبْلَ لِسَانِ الْمَقَالِ. That's speaking in action before speaking in words. By being shakir, by being grateful for everything you were given. Then then he says that الحزن or grief is three levels. الدرجة الأولى حزن العامة وهو حزن على التفريط في الخدمة. The first level is the grief of the public, and that is the grief over negligence in service. That's the first type of grief for the public, negligence in service. When you see that you have been negligent, that you have fallen, in ma'asiyah, or you have been negligent in the service of your Lord, that's the first cause. وعلى التورط في الجفاء, falling into the predicament of aloofness. Jafa with Allah is, the opposite of affinity, friendliness, uns billah. It is when you're distant and your distantness befalls you into more distance or more jafa and more ma'asi, and takes away from your energy to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because you have become distant. And then when you lose that energy and you fall in the ma'asi, what happens? You become more distant. And Allah distances you more. And Allah keeps you away from it. Like when you fall in ma'asi, then your punishment will be more ma'asi. And you think, you'll be given, you may, at that time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may open the doors or the gates of everything that's good to you, to keep you away, to distract you and to keep you away. So falling into the predicament of jafa or aloofness, distantness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something that the believers grieve over. And they grieve over their whatever steps they may have taken that brought them this far, took them this far from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وعلى ضياع الأيام, and the loss of the days. Basically, every day, and that does not just mean days, it means also hours, it means minutes, it means moments. Every time you lose, meaning you lose the pleasure of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is something that you should regret, and it causes the believers grief. والدرجة الثانية حزن أهل الإرادة وهو حزن على, and the second level is the grief of the people of resolve. أهل الإرادة, people of resolve. Those are the select few, the special. And it is over the following. First one is تعلق الوقت بالتفرق, the loss of times in dispersion in the valleys of vanity, dispersion in the valleys of vanity, dispersion in the valleys of pursuits that are suboptimal pursuits that take you away from Allah, pursuits that distract you from Allah. All of this is dispersion of your thoughts. Your thoughts are dispersed. Your thoughts are not together. And the heart will never be together except when it has, جمعية القلب على الله فقط. The jam'iyya of al-qalb, the togetherness of the heart, would only be with its maker. That's natural. That is natural. You will not have your jam'iyya except with your maker. An example of this, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلِ الْأَعْلَى, and to Allah belongs the greatest example. The example of this is an infant with his mother. He will not feel together unless he is with his mother. Even if his father takes him out, he takes out the child to like a very pleasant, for a nice place, gets him ice cream, all of the good stuff that the kid wants. But the kid without the mother being, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give strength to kids who lose their mothers and give them solace and serenity and comfort. But if a child, even with his father, having the best experience with it, he will always want to figure out where his mother is, and will always want, and after some time, starts to become a little bit agitated, a little bit anxious, and wants to see his mother, at least just like see that she's there somewhere. And then he can carry on with whatever he wants. But this جمعية القلب, this the togetherness, holism, of the heart, it will never be attained except if this heart goes back to its maker and its creator. So تعلق الوقت بالتفرق, the loss of times and dispersion, this is something that the special people grieve over. وعلى اشتغال النفس عن الشهود, the occupation with other than shuhud, the beholding of the true one. When the nafs, the ego, is occupied with other than beholding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and watching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's something they grieve over. And then they also grieve over التسلي عن الحزن, distraction from grief. So they grieve over being distracted from grief. Distraction from grief could be because of grief. Because the grief that is desirable as a manifestation of good things, manifestation of belief, manifestation of kind-heartedness, is not the grief over, losing $20. It is not the grief over the dunya. It's not the grief over, a promotion that you did not get. It is a different type of grief. So that grief could distract you from the grief that he's talking about, the station of grief. That vain grief could distract you from the grief that is an indication of your faith, an indication of your kind-heartedness. That is tasalli an al-huzn. And also you could be distracted from grief by the glamours of the dunya and many other things that could distract you from the praiseworthy grief. Then Sheikh here goes back and points out what Ibn al-Qayyim explained in detail in Madaarij As-Saalikeen, and when he talks about the topmost, the elite, the most elite, or the elitist group, he says وَلَيْسَتِ الْخَاصَّةُ مِنْ مَقَامِ الْحُزْنِ فِي شَيْءٍ. The elites, they have nothing to do with the station of grief. They have nothing to do with the station of grief, because they have moved from the station of grief into the station of rida, acceptance, the station of surur, joy, the station of tuma'nina, serenity. These are all different stations. These are all other stations. And they are desirable, not just as manifestations. They are desirable in and of themselves by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah desires for us to take shelter in the station of rida, acceptance, in the station of tuma'nina, serenity. So they are desirable for themselves, those stations. But this is problematic. This statement is still problematic. Because if the station of grief is desirable for the public, no, is the station of grief desirable for the public? No, it is not desirable, except as a manifestation. But as a manifestation of faith, manifestation of kind-heartedness, are the topmost or the best of the best exempt from that station, not bound to visit that station, not distant for that station? No. Even while taking shelter in the station of rida, in the station of submission to the decrees of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, taslim, in the station of tuma'nina billah azza wa jal, having serenity with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are still subject to grief, because we have to be critical in our reading of it. The scholars are human beings. So who's the gold standard? The Prophet ﷺ and the rest of the prophets after him. So when the Prophet was grieving over things, قد نعلم إنه لا يحزنك الذي يقولون. We know in Surah Al-An'am فإنهم لا يكذبونك ولكن الظالمين بآيات الله يجحدون. We know that it saddens you what they say, that what they say saddens you. He was grieving. He was being sad because of their takzeeb, their rejection, their denial, their lack of acceptance. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was trying to comfort him, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling him, فإنهم لا يكذبونك ولكن الظالمين بآيات الله يجحدون. It is not about you, it is about me. Allah is telling him, it is about my verses, my signs. They're rejecting my signs. They're not saying that you're a liar. They never said that you're a liar. They know that you're not a liar. But they are rejecting my signs, Allah's signs and Allah's verses. So, and then لعلك باخع نفسك ألا يكونوا مؤمنين فلعلك باخع نفسك على آثارهم إن لم يؤمنوا بهذا الحديث آسفا. And the other ayat where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was talking about to the Prophet, trying to comfort him. Well, the Prophet was in the highest of the highest stations. I mean, no one could be compared to the station of the Prophet ﷺ, and yet he was still subject to those kinds of this kind of grief, which is an indication of his concern for humanity, his kind-heartedness, his love for humanity. And keep in mind, it is love that you will have for humanity in general. They are the children of your parents, Adam and Hawa. And then the hate that you have for their disbelief is the hate of the lovers, the hate of the people that are concerned for their brothers and sisters. Going back to this issue here. Didn't Yaqub, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about Yaqub? وقال يا أسف على يوسف وبيضت عيناه من الحزن فهو كظيم. And he said, وأسف على يوسف فتولى عنهم وقال يا أسف على يوسف وبيضت عيناه من الحزن فهو كظيم. He said, he anguished over Yusuf, over missing Yusuf, and his eyes turned white out of grief. His eyes turned white out of grief. I had a professor one day, the people who always like to explain the Quran from the spectacles of science. Cataract, the whiteness of the eyes, cataract causes whiteness of the pupil of the eyes. You know that? And cataract can be caused by grief. It could be one of the triggers of cataract is grief. Should we say that this is actually what happened to Yaqub? We don't know. We don't know. I mean, if someone wants to believe this, that's fine. So this person was an ophthalmologist. If you're an ophthalmologist and you really would like to believe this about the verse, that is fine. It is not in conflict with the verse. But, when is it dangerous? When you're trying to make this a fact, when when your interpretation is in conflict with all of the interpretations of the previous scholars or the Mufassirin and the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, and you think that you were just given that disclosure and all of Ashab Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Tabi'een and Tabi'een were deprived of it, and it's just your own disclosure. Yet, if there is no conflict, and with the previous interpretations, no conflict with linguistic implications, and you want to believe something, that's fine for you. It is not a problem. If there is no conflict and it is in harmony with meaning of the ayat. But anyway, وَبِيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ فَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ. So the prophets used to grieve over things. So if he's saying وَلَيْسَتِ الْخَاصَّةُ مِنْ مَقَامِ الْحُزْنِ فِي شَيْءٍ, and the khassa have nothing to do with the station of grief, then it is not true if he means that type of grief that is praised as a manifestation of something good or the natural grief. Both of them, the prophets are subject to both types. The grief that's a manifestation of something good and the grief that is the natural grief. And if he means that this is not the grief that I am talking about, then the other type of grief is not desirable for anyone, even for the public. Then that statement is somewhat problematic. That statement is somewhat problematic. Then he says, however, the third level of huzn or grief is التحزن للعارضات دون الخواطر, grief because of the alternations of states, not the mere impulses. Grief because of the alternation of states. العارضات, alternation of states. So he is in a hal of joy. أنس بالله عز وجل, for instance. You know, this is his hal now. He feels affinity, he feels friendliness, he feels intimacy, he feels closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he's so happy and elated because of being in that station of uns, affinity, closeness, intimacy. And then he's overtaken by another station, hayba, reverence. And he feels saddened because of departing from the first station to the other. Or he is in the station of hope, raja, and then he gets overtaken by another station, the station of fear, khawf, and all of them are valid, and all of them are praiseworthy, because you should have khawf and you should have raja. But if you are now in the station of raja, it makes you content and it makes you comfortable to be in the station of raja. When you're overtaken by the station of khawf, then you're saddened by this departure from the station of raja. عارضات دون الخواطر, not just the mere impulses. And then ومعارضات القصود, and the conflicting pursuits. القصود, that which you seek, that which يقصد. معارضات القصود, the conflicts between the different pursuits. And those, those معارضات القصود could be the most distressing thing for the elites, for the special ones, the select few, because they are keen on pleasing Allah in the in attaining the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all conditions, and seeking the shortest way to the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they have conflicting pursuits, and they don't know which one is more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they don't know how to choose. And they don't know if some are pleasing to Allah and some are displeasing. Sometimes in the times of fitan in particular, trials and tribulations in particular, look at the post-revolution in the different Muslim countries and how much trials and tribulations were caused, and how the best dua and scholars and had conflicts among themselves and disagreements, and it is extremely hard to be discerning in times of trials and tribulations. Even the Sahaba in the times of the fitan, it was extremely hard. Which side should you take? What should you be doing now? Should you be taking sides? These are mu'aradat al-qusud, the conflicts and pursuits. They are very distressing to the disbelievers, because you have to make a decision, and you're afraid that your ego, that you have not escaped from the urges of your ego, and your ego is still in control of your decision. And how could you completely walk away from your ego so your decision becomes all for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Complete impartiality, tajarrud. Tajreed. Tajreed is when you basically strip away all of the urges of the ego, all of the desires of the ego. And then you have a pure heart, a clean heart, a transparent heart, one that is capable of making the right decision, most pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wouldn't that cause them distress? Absolutely. Absolutely. It would cause them a great deal of anxiety and distress. معارضات القصود. And lastly, والاعتراضات على الأحكام, objections to the decrees, and those decrees could be the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the universal decrees of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Objecting to the commands is by, failing to. And at this level, objecting to the command is not by failing to submit. He's talking about the elites here. Objecting to the command is by finding some resistance in your heart when the command removes you from your hal, from your state, or the hal. Like if the command removes you from dhikr, Allah tells you to do something other than dhikr, and you are in your jam'iyya now, you are in your togetherness with Allah, and you're in a state of elation by this dhikr, you have been making dhikr for the last couple of hours, and then there is a command to do something else at this point, at this time. Then you must make the knowledge of the deen, the knowledge of Sharia, supreme in this case. And the chief guide should be the knowledge of the deen, not your taste, not your hal, and not the comfort that you have in this station. And that could be hard for people because they could be so comfortable in a station, and then when they're removed, they find this resistance. It is not the lack of submission here, it is that resistance in their hearts. Whereas the true wali is the one who submits immediately to the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and moves from any hal to wherever Allah wants him to be, or whatever Allah wants him to do. And then objecting to the universal decrees, it is in this particular state, objecting to the universal decrees, sometimes it is described as desiring other than what Allah had desired. That's why Abdullah ibn Umar, when his son died, and he was laughing, he said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ أَحَبَّ أَمْرًا فَأَحْبَبْتُ أَنْ أُحِبَّ مَا أَحَبَّ اللَّهُ. Allah loved something and I love to love that which He loved. So he did not want to desire other than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to desire, but we said that the Prophet ﷺ wept and showed grief over the death of his son because he was able to master those two stations, the station of mercy, kind-heartedness, compassion for his son, and the station of acceptance of the decrees of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who can master the stations simultaneously like the Prophet, that is better for them than to master one only of the two stations. And then al-i'tiradat ala al-ahkam, objecting to the universal decrees, could also be shown by failing to take immediate shelter in the station of rida, failing to take immediate shelter in the station of rida. Certainly that is for people who are at a lower level or a lower degree than the first group. It's failing to take immediate shelter in the state of rida and showing resentment or lack of acceptance. قولوا قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.